Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the History at Night program at San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site. This is our June 2021 session, and we are really excited that you would take some of your time to join us this evening. The History at Night program is sponsored by the Friends of the San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site. This is our 10th episode for what we're considering our virtual season. This is also going to complete our second full season of History at Night. I've got some exciting news about season 3 coming up near the end, so I hope you'll want to stick around for that. Tonight, we are privileged to have as our guest James Harkins, the Director of Public Services for the Archives and Records section of the Texas General Land Office. There's some really interesting connections that link the GLO to the storylines that we share here at San Felipe de Austin, from maps generated by Stephen F. Austin and his surveyors to the Spanish language land grants that were issued to Austin's colonists, and much, much more. The staff at the General Land Office were among the very first people that I engaged when I started working on this project way back around 2009, 2010. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we jump into the session tonight. This program is being recorded, and as a registrant, you'll be receiving a link to the recording once it's posted to our agency's YouTube channel. If you really enjoy the program, consider sharing that link with friends of yours who couldn't join us tonight. It's always a great way to make sure that they know what you're excited about, give you something to talk about next time you meet for coffee. As always, we're going to encourage you to use the question and answer section of Zoom in order to post questions that'll be addressed at the end of the session tonight. So just post those there in text as they come to you, and we're going to filter through those and try to prioritize some as we get into the last few minutes of the evening. Staff and I'll be working with me on that. You may see if your question has a particular easy or quick answer, you may see us respond in the question and answer comments. So keep an eye on that, or in that section. So keep an eye on those statements coming through. So I want to give you a real quick bio for our guest tonight. As I mentioned, James Harkins is the Director of Public Services for the Texas General Land Office Archives and Records. He graduated from Texas State University in San Marcos in 2005. In 2010, he received a master's degree in public administration, also from Texas State, and is the 2010-2011 James W. McGrew Research Award winner for his graduate thesis in the American Society for Professional Administrators. He's worked for the General Land Office since May of 2005. Now, without any further ado, we're going to jump in and get this thing going. So, James, there's a lot of fascinating history held by your agency. I always find it interesting how our visitors are aware or not aware, and just super excited to learn about the things that you've placed online, the digital resources that you guys have put out, some of the depth and availability of those records that are available to individual researchers and people that want to get excited about this history. One of my favorite origin stories about your agency involves Stephen F. Austin's brother-in-law, James Perry, who hands off the bulk of the Austin impresario papers to the newly formed agency at the time of the Republic. So how did the GLO come into being? How important were the archives to its creation? And why was it so important to the Republic of Texas?
Well, first of all, thank you for letting me join you, Brian. It's exciting to be able to be part of San Felipe de Austin's video series. If people were paying attention earlier in the year, you were kind enough to join us for our video series, and we call it This Week in Texas History, and we were able to interview you and learn more about San Felipe de Austin and share some of your resources with our audience. And so people who want to view that interview and some of the other ones that we've done with people like Andrew Torgett, Jim Bevel, and several Ken Wise and several others, they can sign up at savetexashistory.org to join our mailing list, and they'll be able to have access to all of those interviews too. And so, yeah, the General Land Office has got one of the great archival collections in the state of Texas. We've got about 45,000 maps and about 36 million documents, and that's a lot of paper. We take up about two floors within the Stephen F. Austin building here in Austin, Texas, and we've got some really impressive stuff. One of the things that people don't realize is that one of the first jobs of the land office was actually kind of in an archival role. And that's because the first job of the first land commissioner, John P. Borden, who we're going to talk a little bit about later, was to actually make sense of all of the land records that had been issued prior to the Texas Revolution. His first job was to gather up all of the land records, make sense of them, put them in some type of order, gather them from all of the different land offices that were around the territory of Texas. And he even had to go across the Rio Grande into Tamaulipas and gather records as well. And so his job was to make sense of all this. And it was very difficult. He needed to take Stephen F. Austin's records from San Felipe. He needed to take Green DeWitt's records and several other of the impresarios, as well as any land grants from Spanish from that were dealt out during the Spanish time period or the Mexican time period. It was a difficult job. And so really the first task of the land office was a custodial role to put all this together.
We always tell visitors, it's a lot like, well, we always find that both Spain and Mexico and then the Republic of Texas were processing the value of land as a commodity. And so they needed to know who owned what in order to know what was viable as a resource, what could be handed out, what could be doled out, what could be developed. And so that's an interesting part of the story.
Yeah, one of the things about our collection and about the early land office is that it served two roles in that custodial capacity. Not only to collect the records and document the lands that had already been issued, but it also needed to be able to turn around and issue land grants so people could claim other parts of the Republic and not have conflicting surveys. And so it's interesting to kind of see how he was able to piece everything together, despite there not really being it was largely a continuation from the Mexican time period, but they really kind of established a whole new system that joined the Spanish and Mexican tradition with the English and American tradition, and really kind of made a unique set of surveying circumstances and land distribution systems here in Texas.
So a great byproduct of that I find a lot of our genealogical visitors who have an ancestral footprint related to early land grants, many of them are surprised that there are English translations that are as early as they are. So one of the challenges obviously for the land office was to convert those Spanish documents to English so that everyone was working from the same set of information. That's a really neat component for us. So
one of the neat things about that, Brian, is one of the first, John P. Borden, his first employees, he had a chief clerk to kind of help manage the day-to-day operations, and he had a Spanish translator because that obviously, with all of the records being in Spanish prior to that, we needed to be able to have them accessible to an English language audience. And so Galen Greaser, who's a previous translator here, he used to always joke that this Spanish translator and the chief clerk used to make the same amount of money, used to have the same paycheck. And he would always joke with our chief clerk, well, how come we haven't continued that? Never got very far, but it was worth a shot.
Well, there's our John P. Borden slide. So I mentioned, I'm really fascinated by the connections our site, our historic site, has to the archives and the records that your agency holds. And so talking about John P. Borden again, the Borden family, the four brothers and their father, were all immigrants to Mexican Texas who lived here at San Felipe de Austin at various times. And so John P. Borden, they all did some work typically involving surveying in Austin's colony. Of course, Gail Borden would become famous as the proprietor and publisher of the Telegraph and Texas Register during the Revolution, and probably shockingly to Texans, even more famous than that when he invented condensed milk. But John Borden, the brother who becomes the first land commissioner, is an important one of our residents too. So what do we know? You mentioned some of the things he did to organize the commission. Is there anything specific about his past, or how did he get chosen the first commissioner? What do we know about his situation?
Well, you mentioned milk and the press for Gale. I like to think of him as the inventor of the meat biscuit,
Fair enough.
which I think everybody can really enjoy.
There's also a land spooner you can Google too. They're two good lesser known inventions.
So John P, he was selected through his work on helping organize Austin's papers and helping, once Austin passed away, there was a lot of administrative duties that needed to happen with his papers to get them ready to actually submit to the land office. And so John P helped with those, I think through his connection through Gale to James Perry. And so Gale, John P, and Thomas H, they helped put together Austin's papers for the GLO, and they also helped complete some of his mapping duties, which we'll talk a little bit about later on, specifically the connected map of Austin's colony. And so John P was, one of the jokes that we like to say is that he wasn't in the room whenever they nominated him for the job. So that's the lesson for everybody, to make sure that you show up. So like I said, his first job was collecting all of the records and making sense of them. And that was a difficult task because he was not really given a budget. He didn't have an office for about a year. So he was kind of working out of his home and out of horse and buggy kind of thing. And he was having to go to all these different regional land offices and really kind of say, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, which is the exact thing everybody wants to hear, right? Sure. And so he's trying to make sense of all this without a budget, without an office, no supplies, and really, I think it was several months until he even had a chief clerk. And so he struggled, and he talked a lot about that in his early commissioner reports to Congress. And he would say there's no sense to the records here. There's no organization. This is going to take a lot of work. And so he's working from 1837 until 1839 in Houston, and then the government decides to move to Austin, and so they closed the land office in September, and about 5 days later, Borden is in charge of organizing everything essentially for the government, for the GLO, and I think 11 other state agencies, republic agencies. And he moves everything, gets to Austin, and they open in Austin in October of 39. And so they moved into a log cabin that was at the corner of 5th in Colorado. For anybody who's driving around Austin and needs to know early land office geography. And they were in a log cabin, and not too much longer, about a year later, Borden kind of got fed up with it, and he resigned in December of 1840, shortly after his second term started. And so about a month later, they appointed Thomas William Ward, our friend Pegleg, and he didn't have a much easier time managing the land office either. The one good thing I guess you can say about Borden versus Ward is Borden didn't have a cannon fired at him, for instance, by the people of Austin.
Memorialized by the statue there on Congress. So I have a quick trivia before we move on about Borden that we talk about here, John Borden, that is. So we have in our exhibit space, I'm sitting in our exhibit to talk with you tonight, and actually in front of the things that best represent kind of our land story. So the Austin desk behind me, and our copy, our high digital scan of the registro, which is in your archives, of course, the Register of Austin's First Families. But here you see this image of the cabin that's in our facility that we believe was constructed by a German immigrant who came to Austin's colony in the last contract. His name was Peter Piper, and that would have the cabin constructed around 1835. But what's interesting with Mr. Piper in the land office, he had begun his survey. He'd been working through the Mexican system when he gets here late in Austin's colony. And then because of the conflict of revolution and everything else, he'd not been issued his title before the land office is shut down. And so after independence, he approaches Borden and the new land office and says, hey, what do I do? How do I get title to my land? They essentially go back through the process, confirm the survey that was all done to the spec that they would have needed during the Mexican era, and then they rubber stamp him and issue his title as part of the new republic. So his claim crosses over that independence line, which is a real neat story for us.
Yeah, and that was not uncommon. They were in late November. The provisional government closed all the land offices, and so word got out to all these different regional offices and said, okay, no more issuing title after this date. But they kept on doing it because one, a lot of the regional offices didn't realize that, or didn't believe that the provisional government had the authority to close down the offices. And they also just kind of said, we'll manage this, don't worry. And so they were still issuing several titles, several orders for field notes, but it wasn't legal. And so you have these people like Piper who got their paperwork done. They said, okay, I'm about to get my land and things are going to get moving. He turns it in, the paperwork gets into the GLO, and the land office says, sorry, that's not going to work for us. This is an illegal survey. And so a lot of times what they would do is they would just work with the land office would work with the individual to say, okay, we need to get this resurveyed, get this redone, and we'll issue a first class head right instead of a Spanish title.
Excellent stuff. So I know we've talked about it briefly, but I want to give you a chance just to talk in a little more depth as you'd like. A lot of researchers, academics, and amateurs who are doing genealogical research and other things are familiar with the Spanish collection to some degree at your archives, but give our viewers here tonight a little sense of what that's all about. What's the essence of the Spanish collection?
So the Spanish collection is it's one of the real gems of Texas history, in my opinion. It contains about 7,000 titles, 4,000 titles of land grants that were issued prior to 1836. And so that's part of the Spanish collection. The way that the Spanish collection is divided, we organize it through three catalogs, essentially. And I've got those here. The first one is the catalog to the Spanish collection, part 1. And this is essentially it's a catalog to all of the titles that were issued prior to 1836 of land grants north of the Nueces River. The catalog, part 2, looks like this, and it contains it contains a list of all of the kind of administrative paperwork that is associated with managing and granting land. And it's got something, there are so many different topics that this covers, from Austin's colony to Hayden Edwards expulsion, slavery, dealing with Native Americans. There's even a document in here about giving authority to kill stray dogs in the towns. So, I mean, there's a little bit of everything. So for people who are doing historical research, I highly recommend picking up a copy of part 2 of the catalog of the Spanish collection from the GLO, and you'll be amazed at what you can find. We're working on translating all of this material. You would think having a translator since 1837, 38, 39, everything would be translated, but no, they've been slacking. I say that, but I couldn't do the work. One of the neat things is the first translator said, oh, it'll take about 2 years for us to translate all of the records. And that did not happen. There's still several hundred, if not thousands, of Spanish documents that have not been translated, many of them in this collection. We've recently translated all of the documents that relate to slavery and all of the documents that relate to Indian interactions and how it dealt with the land. And then the third book is The New Guide to Spanish and Mexican Land Grants in South Texas. And this deals with everything between in the Trans-Nueces region, between the Rio Grande and the Nueces River, because that is a really complicated, convoluted story. And so people who are doing genealogical research south of the Nueces River prior to 1836, that's the one for you. So this is going to be my plug for the first part of the presentation. Each of these books are available from the land office for $15, and you can order them online.
And of course, that Nueces distinction is an important one. A lot of our visitors don't sometimes recognize this disputed boundary to the south and how it played out between Mexico, the United States, Texas as a republic, and how that factors into a lot of things we're looking at now. So that's all great information about Spanish collection. We certainly use it regularly here. You mentioned some of the things that have recently been translated, and I'm going to share a couple of the documents here with our viewers, but we're excited to be able to make use of some of that, even in some contemporary updates to our exhibits that we're doing. So one of those slavery documents we recently factored into something we're working on here. So this is just, in my mind, kind of a stereotypical document that we would find related to a land title, land transaction. It's got a unique signature on it. You've got all kinds of things like this in your collection, right?
Yeah, you know, in the Spanish collection, it's virtually a who's who of the Texas Revolution. We're looking at a title for James Bowie, and I forget what part of the state this is located in, but one of the things that we always like to point out is how emphatic he's putting his paraph on there. He's really laying it in, emphasizing, and by God, I'm James Bowie. One of the neat things about that document if you're looking at it on the lower left, there's a little note in Spanish that talks about how Bowie recently married Ursula Veraminde, and it talks about because of the recent wedding that he's entitled to more land. He's entitled to a full league in the bore. I think that's what a full league of land because he's now a married head of household as opposed to a single individual. And so we've always kind of wondered what the timeline of all that worked out, of whenever he found out he'd get 3,000 more acres if he got married, and how that related to actually receiving land and getting married. Not that he would do such a thing.
Good stuff. I think we have another resource we can share from the land office. Yeah. So Nicholas Clopper was actually one of our settlers here at San Felipe de Austin. And so we use some of these documents to research what was happening here for people that were settling in the footprint of Austin's headquarters. And in the case of the Clopper family, they were a mercantile group who left us some great resources beyond just their land grant. They were neighbors briefly to Jane Long and her in-laws living here in the town. One of my favorite stories about the Cloppers is that Nicholas here, who's the patriarch, goes back to Cincinnati, which is where he had immigrated from, when he gets nervous about the impending revolution and the potential conflict. And he becomes one of the people that motivates the subscription for the Twin Sisters. So he's got a footprint here in Texas, and then he's involved in that very famous story related to the victory at San Jacinto. So I think the viewers tonight, if they're not aware of what they can do to research your collection, James, are going to learn a lot about access to stuff. Is there anything specific from what you guys consider special collections you want to touch upon? I know we also want to get to historic maps, and then we're going to jump into some information about our site connection again.
Yeah, the special collections here at the GLO are really quite fantastic, and they're all kind of they're all used to help people make claims to receive land. One of my two favorite collections within the special collection is the Court of Claims and the Republic Donation Vouchers. The Court of Claims is a set of documents that there was a special commission that was established in the 1840s, I think, through the 1850s to investigate claims against the state and republic. And so people would provide whatever proof they had that they were in Texas during the Texas Revolution, prior to the Revolution, during the Republic period, whatever it might be. And there's things in there from orders from San Jacinto signed by Sam Houston to essentially like a journal of a guy in the Texas Navy talking about how he was on the Invincible. There's a letter from one of my favorite items is a letter from John C. Logan, who is a private from Kentucky. And he writes to his family in early 1836, and he says, man, Texas is the greatest place in the world. The land is perfect. It's beautiful. There's a cow on every hill, and you don't have to do anything to grow any food. This is the greatest place ever. And oh, by the way, I'm going to war with Mexico, and if something happens to me, y'all are entitled to land. It's one of the last things that he communicates to his family. So on February 24th, he writes a second letter to his family saying, Texas is not all that great. Things are not looking good. The Mexican army, they are storming down on us. They are coming. We're having to cut up our tents to make pants. A lot of people don't have shoes. Our supplies have been embargoed. We're running out of meat. We're eating our horses. And he says, we're going to go meet the Mexican army, but just in case, goodbye. And so what happens to John Logan is he's one of the men who's at Goliad, and he's killed as part of the massacre. And it's really quite a touching story. And that's the type of stuff that you can find in our collection. Other types of things, if somebody were to be doing genealogical research and they wanted to know about a German ancestor who came to Texas in the 1840s and 50s, the GLO is an absolute must stop for you. We've got all of the German immigration records, the Fisher-Miller transfer records, and those have things like the ship that they rode, when they arrived, the port that they left in Germany, and several other types of important genealogical information. Another neat collection is the Confederate script collection, which is about 3,000 documents that relate to indigent veterans of the Civil War of the Confederacy who were injured during battle. And it includes testimony of so-and-so was blown up by a powder keg and his wife is applying for land. And so they would give 1,280 acres to the wife that she would then usually turn around and sell. So there is all sorts of interesting information on 19th century Texas and earlier as part of the Spanish collection within the GLO.
That's exciting stuff. So let's make this pivot to maps, and it's a really important part of the collection, including some that are really meaningful to our site. Again, I'm sitting in front of this desk that we think Stephen F. Austin was using in his lifetime here. The plat of this town of San Felipe de Austin, and the footprint that I'm sitting now, is part of the registro, the replica that's right here over my shoulder. And then, of course, there's this wonderful connected map of Austin's colony. We're going to talk about those later. But give us a quick essence of the map collection at the GLO and how important that is to your archives.
So if you've ever run into me at TSHA or some other conference, you'll know I'm a map guy, and I always have been. And I like to tell a quick personal story, if I may. Whenever I was in elementary school at Moore Elementary, home of the Fighting Armadillos in Cypress, Texas, there was a map on the wall of the cafeterias, the Natural Heritage Map of Texas. And it was released in 1986. And so I was in elementary school right after this map came out. It was produced by the GLO. And I used to look at it every day whenever I'd walk to the bus and from the bus, and I would say, man, that's a cool map. And I would, go up to it, look at it, study it. And then after I graduated from Moore Elementary, I never saw that map again until the day that I applied, or until the day I actually interviewed for the internship here at the GLO in 2005. So about, 20 something years later, Here's the Natural Heritage Map of Texas hanging on the wall of the person who's interviewing me for the job. We spent more time talking about the map than I think we did answering the questions. And I think that love of maps, that love of Texas and geography and history came through, and it's why I got the job. And they haven't got rid of me yet, which is nice. And so I'm a map guy. And so the GLO has got about 45,000 maps, and that collection is growing. We receive donations regularly. We also have a small acquisitions budget for acquiring maps that amplify the collection. The oldest map dates to the 16th century and is, at that time period, they weren't making very detailed maps of Texas. And so one of the neat things about our collection is that it shows Texas from a very macro view as part of North America and the Western Hemisphere to a very micro view at the county, city, and even individual land grant level. And so that's one of the reasons that I think our collection is so unique, is because we do have all of the individual land grants in the state plotted, but we also have got beautiful state maps and republic maps and things that show how Texas fits within the Southwest. And one of the exciting things that we've been doing is we've been, since I think 2016, having some really impressive map exhibits. My favorite one being Mapping Texas from, I can't remember the exact title, but it's called Mapping Texas. And it's been seen by over 1 million people. It was at the Whitty Museum in 2016, the Houston Museum, it was at the Houston Museum of Natural Science in 2017. It was at the Bush Library in College Station in 2018, and it's been in a couple of other places. And so we're actually, that is now a traveling exhibit where we send reproductions. So if there's any buddy who's part of a historic site that's looking for a traveling exhibit about Texas maps, have we got something for you? That's been one of the most fun parts of the project, is putting these exhibits together so people can see what has really been hidden treasures in Texas history here at the GLO.
I happen to be inside a facility that has a temporary gallery, and I can't imagine we won't be showing some of those maps off here in the future. So thanks for that notice, James. We've got a couple of map images I want to share with our viewers tonight, just to give you a sense of some of the things that come from the collection. I know this is one of Austin's maps, one of the Tanner maps, and actually we used a version of this for our lobby. Visitors that have been here before will recognize this is one of the walk surface maps that's at the front of our exhibit space right as you come in, and a really compelling map where Austin is starting to give this impression of what Texas as part of the Republic of Mexico looks like. So it's a really fascinating piece, and there are a lot of early Austin pieces that are part of this collection. You have anything you want to say about the Tanner map, James?
I'm spying on the question and answers right now, Brian, and sure. Some people are giving me an opportunity to plug something, so I'm going to take it. Somebody asked, let's see, Karen Jones asked, is the information like about John Logan or the maps available online? And yes, they are. All of our land grant files have been scanned and are available through our land grant database. They're available as full color PDFs for you to download, and you would just search by the last name of somebody within the land grant database, and you could find their land grant documents, their special collection documents, and whatever else. We also have a map database that is just called Map Store, which has got Zoomify capabilities of almost all of the 45,000 map sketches and drawings have been scanned. And you can zoom in, you can zoom in on those very tightly and see great detail. And I'd like to pat the land office on the back because we have been scanning since the year 2001, really kind of before most libraries, archives, or museums were digitizing their collection. We were kind of making it up as we go, and we've really kind of figured out, and we're really kind of trailblazers as far as historic digitization. And we would like to say that we did it for history lovers, but really the reason that we did that is because these records are living records. They're used by surveyors, oil and gas people, lawyers who are trying to sue somebody about oil and gas, and all sorts of different clients like that. And as a result, genealogists, historians, and teachers, whomever else, is able to view these documents and these maps in full color scans and download the documents. And you can also purchase copies of the maps for $20 to $40. So that was a plug. And so the Austin Tanner map that you're showing is one of the most important maps of Texas. It shows the original was made in 1830 by Stephen F. Austin, and that's one of the reasons he should be considered probably he would be the George Washington on the Mount Rushmore of Texas maps because of how important this map was. He promised the Mexican government that he would make a map of Texas in, I think, 1824. He made that promise, or 1823, and he worked for the next 7 years to put this together. He sent one copy to Henry Tanner in Philadelphia, and he sent one copy in Spanish to Mexico. The one that he sent to Tanner in Philadelphia, it was used to encourage immigration to Texas and specifically to Austin's colony. The one that he sent to Mexico, he said, I'm also going to sign over the copyright to the government. So if y'all want to release this map, you can. They didn't. And so the Tanner map from Philadelphia really became the view of Texas for probably about the next 20 years. It was emulated by other map makers all along the way up until about 1849 when Jacob de Cordova released his map. And so in 1840, the Austin Tanner map, it used to have prior to 1840, it had a Mexican eagle on it, which Austin insisted on it being placed on there so that he could really kind of show the Mexican government, we're part of Mexico. We're not part of the United States. We're not our own republic. We are part of Mexico. And the eagle is standing on top of the cactus. And one of the things that I find interesting, maybe this is just a coincidence due to geography, or maybe he's trying to make a deeper connection. The paddle that the eagle is standing on is for Coahuila y Tejas. And I've always liked to romantically say, well, I think he's trying to say that Coahuila y Texas is firmly within the grip of the Mexican government, sort of. And so then there's the revolution. In 1840, Tanner releases the map again, and this time he removes the eagle and he puts General Austin's map of Texas. And so it stays as General Austin's map of Texas until its last release in 1848. And the copy that we've got that you're showing was actually only recently donated to the GLO about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was hanging in somebody's home under glass, and it was taped. And so you can see all the cross marks of tape. And so we actually have the last edition. We're the only people, we're the only agency that we've been able to identify with a copy of the 1848 map.
That's a wonderful piece. And our visitors really enjoy the Tanner version. We use one of the 1830 versions on the floor. So of course we have the eagle. That was an important part of our story too here, but it's a great connection over that 20-year story. I want to reiterate something you mentioned earlier about your digital collection, the things you've done to put things out and make them available to researchers. When we have visitors here who are familiar with the Land Office collection, James, to a T, they comment on the resources on your website being the most accessible, the most user-friendly, the most available to them as researchers. So I think that's reflected well in the work that you guys are doing. So here's another one of these sort of modern variants, which is generated in-house agency map on land grants of Texas. So give us a sense of what's going on here.
So that's a map that I compiled with Patrick Walsh, who I work with, and Mark Conway in our GIS department. And that we did that in about 2016, I think. And what I wanted to do was show every land grant in Texas and identify when it was granted or patented from the state. And so all the area in red on there is land that was issued by Spain or Mexico prior to 1836. You can kind of see that there's blue throughout the eastern part of the state, and those are first-class head rights. Those are people who arrived prior to March 2nd of 1836 and received a land grant from the state. Out in West Texas, it's kind of a checkerboard between kind of a beige and green checkerboard. And those are all land grants that were issued to half of them. I think the green ones were issued to railroad companies, and the beige ones were reserved for the permanent school fund for the state. And so I think that more so than any other map, this one shows kind of the development of the land grant system throughout the 19th century. And we put charts on there on the upper left and bottom portion that indicate the percentage of land that was given through whatever program. And it ends up being about 1/7 of the current area of the state was issued by Spain or Mexico.
That's a really fascinating piece, and I applaud you for the vision to work with your staff to put a piece like that together. All right, well, I am really excited about moving into some discussions about San Felipe de Austin and how our story resonates, at least for us, in your collection. I know y'all got a lot of exciting things. I'm super jealous of all the good stuff you guys get to celebrate and explore every day. But for us, being able to find the footprint of our story and so much of what you hold is a really important part of how we interpret our story. You know, we have everything from correspondence from Austin, the land grant documents that were issued. We talked about that earlier, all these maps. Tell us about the registro, which you can see here in the lower left, for those of you that are looking at home. Give us some sense about the recent preservation efforts, but more importantly, what is the document?
So the registro is a gigantic leather-bound volume that you need to put a weight belt on to lift. It weighs about 35 pounds, and it is essentially a monument to Austin's record keeping. He was a meticulous administrator of the lands of Texas as the impresario. And this book records all of the original titles of Austin's colony, and so the old 300. And so he had to ask the Mexican government for permission to put the book together, which is the documentation at the beginning. And then it's page after page of the land title that was issued within his colony and signed by him. Every single page is signed by him, the Baron de Bastrop, and one or two other guys. And they each contain a plat of the land grant that was issued. And so it's page after page after page of this amazing record that protects title to Spanish title, Mexican title within his colony.
Very nice. So I want to flip through a couple of, I think we've got a map image about the plat that I'm going to share with you next, which, oh, sorry, this is again one of the Tanner maps. That's a version that's closer to what we did, although that's the 1840 version. So we still use one of the earlier versions with the eagle on our map floor. But let's take a look at the plat map for the town, which also comes from the registro.
Right.
And we were super excited. This is the first land grant essentially that's depicted in the volume. And it's to give space to create essentially a capital town to support Austin's colony. So here's the 1824 plat of the town that we then incorporated in multiple ways in the exhibit space. And I think we have a couple of images here of how we have this outdoor plaza. We were really excited to work with you guys to bring this art to life as part of our exhibit component. And what we're trying to show with it, you see this desktop or the tabletop element in the foreground. Austin had such an ambitious thought of what he was building here. It's 1,000 acres of plotted townscape, about 100 of which were actually developed. So on the ground, we try to show you the scope of the vision, and on the tabletop, a little closer reality of what actually happened here along the Brazos River. But we find that to be a really compelling map. I know you've got a lot of town plots and a lot of different things that y'all have in your collection, but obviously this is an important one to us. Anything you'd like to comment on related to the plot of this town?
Yeah, this map is it's really cool because for one, it breaks up the monotony of the registro of title after title. But that's just kind of a for somebody who's flipping through the book. But it also really establishes the ground rules for how Texas is going to be surveyed. It establishes the Texas vara at 33 1/3 inches, and it says from henceforth Texas will be a vara community, and today at the land office we still do official measurements via that 33 1/3 inch vara. And so Austin, whenever he was putting this together, he laid out San Felipe the same way that other Spanish and Mexican towns were laid out, with town squares, with plazas, the church right off of the plaza. And he was really trying to develop a strong Spanish Mexican traditioned city in San Felipe.
We're really excited about that as a resource for us. And we kind of saved the best for last before we shift into some Q&A for our viewers tonight. And it has to do with what I think is my favorite map in your collection, although it'd be hard to choose, this connected map of Austin's colony. I think the first time after I took the job here at San Felipe, I started working on the project, that I came to your reading room in the Austin building. Somebody was driving this around in the research room on a digital screen and kind of showing what was happening with the work. There it is in the case that you guys have in your archives. I mean, it's just a remarkable piece. And that image there should give our viewers a perspective on how large this map is, first and foremost. You guys have done some tremendous digital work on it too. And it's got to be, in some ways, one of the most important parts of your land grant map that you issued, because it's giving you all that essence of Austin's colony as well.
Yeah, it's not really even debatable. It is the most important map at the GLO. And it probably by quite a bit. And I know that as an archivist, I'm not supposed to rank things, but it's hard not to with this particular map. It's about 8 feet by 8 feet, and it was used by Austin to keep track of it was used by Austin and his commissioners to keep track of all of the land that was granted and within his colony. And it was started to be worked on in 1833, and they were plotting land grants. And then in 1836, the revolution comes, and on March 24th, it's packed up with all of Austin's other papers and taken to, and the registro, and taken to Fort Jessup in Louisiana. And it kind of hung out there until the war was over, and came back, I think, at the end of 1836, maybe early 1837. And it was completed by John P., Thomas H., and Gail Borden. And it was put together and stored, probably rolled up on top of a cabinet for a century after that. But what this map does is it's really kind of a pilot project for the land office. This is one of this map and the registro are kind of, we like to explain that it really kind of set the standard for how the land office would do work moving forward. You would receive your land grant paperwork from the individual. You would issue your certificate. They would take it to a surveyor. The surveyor would make the field notes and then submit the field notes to the land office. Our draftsman would plot it on the map, make sure that it doesn't conflict with any other surveys, and then we would issue you a patent to the land after it was done. And so this was really kind of how business was done from the very beginning. It's how it was done throughout the 19th century. And so one of the neat things about this map is that it was used to really kind of show what land in the area did Austin grant. And all the other area was then available to be granted to other settlers.
Yeah, this is a fabulous piece. And anyone that comes into our facility here doing any kind of personal research related to someone who received land in Austin's colony, we end up navigating the digitized version of this right here behind me in this desk feature so that they can explore the map themselves. For those of you that were watching as James and I were talking, we also were sharing with you an interactive feature that you can access right there from home that shows you kind of a Google Earth vision with the map overlaid behind it through a viewer that you can then run through. It's a really fascinating piece. Someone's already made a comment here talking about how fabulous that was just watching us do it now. So imagine how much fun you'll have exploring it yourself. I want to give a couple of other quick shameless plugs for you guys. Someone asked about the ability of acquiring a copy of this map, which of course I know you sell it through your map store, so there's a great chance there. And because of its size, I'm pretty sure y'all sell it as a digital file as well, so that if you don't have eight square feet or 8 by 8 feet on your wall to put it up, you can deal with that. I would also point out the beautiful compass rose that's on that map. You guys incorporated into a Christmas ornament, which is a popular seller in our store. We appreciate you working with us on that, and I'm sure it's something y'all have sold very well as well.
And I noticed Gordon Blocker asked why Samuel May Williams is being avoided. He's not being avoided. I just don't know a whole lot about him, unfortunately. But he's one of the people who signed I think almost every page of the registro. So not throwing shade at Adam. Just not my expertise, but you are, Gordon.
That's right. Good stuff. All right, well, I think we're going to move on to some Q&A. I really appreciate your time with us and helping through this all. The document you just saw, I guess I should have mentioned, is the most recent document that we've added to our collection, which came from some of the recent translation related to documents between Austin, touching on the issue of slavery, and this had to do with the communication with the Ayuntamiento's office in Bayar. So we're really excited to be able to bring this to our visitors. It's going to be actually featured in the desk interactive that sits here behind me where I'm sitting tonight.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about that document,
Sure.
Brian, is that Austin traditionally signed all of his work, at least his work here. He would sign it "God and Liberty."
Right.
On this particular document, he signs it "God and Law," which we've always found it interesting that the one document related to slavery, he's signing it "God and Law" versus "God and Liberty," and we kind of wonder why that is. But he's making the case that slavery is needed within Austin's colony, and that his settlers would really be a lot happier if they had access to free labor. And so, with the issue of slavery with Austin, it's complicated because he has to make the case on a lot of different sides. And I saw a great presentation by Andrew Torgett a couple of years ago about that issue.
Absolutely. And we've relied on Dr. Torgett for a lot of that vision as well. And I appreciate you pointing out that God and law component. We've been through this document, but I'm not sure that really resonated with us. So we appreciate the insights you guys bring to your collection. All right. We've got a few questions I'm going to run through. And then for those of you that are patient enough to stick around, we've got a little bit of housekeeping at the end of the session as well, including that information that I mentioned I'd share with you about season 3, which is just a couple of months away at this point. So we had a question from someone about whether there's a file or a record, a known record of people who refused land grants by Stephen F. Austin. I think that's a trickier question than maybe the audience member intended. I know there's been research done into people who forfeited their grants, and we sometimes talk about that here. We can find evidence of people who began the issuance process and then for whatever reason didn't get to the fulfillment and the completion stage. I don't know that we have great records, and I'm not even sure there are that many people that Austin's just flat out turning away. And I'm not sure that's what the writer, the presenter meant. But you've also seen some of this evidence, James, of people that forfeited grants. Do you want to know a little bit about
that? I'll be honest, I'd be making up an answer if I tried to answer that one. That would be a question that I would send to our Spanish translator, Brian Stoffer, who I hope we can bring on to season 3 for you, Brian.
Yeah, we hope to do that too.
But that is not a issue that I've ever researched.
So to the questioner, I do know some of this is known, and my concern is I don't know how completely it's known. There are pockets of it. So for instance, we joke with our visitors who are descended from Austin's Old 300 that there are, I believe, 297 actual land grants issued as part of that contract. I think there were more that began the application process, some of which were forfeited. And there are researchers. We have a book in our gift shop by scholar Paul Spellman, who talks about some of the people who forfeited their grants. So yes, I think some of that is known. I just don't know how much it's considered a complete research check. Someone's asked us, they were doing some genealogical research and they're wondering how much of your collection kind of remains to be digitized, or what can they expect to find if they're launching a genealogical research for someone who made a land grant claim?
Right. So our land grant database has got about 3.5 million individual documents digitized. And most of that is our entire Spanish collection, all of the land grant files, and all of our special collections. And we're now working on mineral files and school files. And so mineral files deal with mineral rights on state lands, and that's dates back to about 1900. It's hard. That's part of the collection that I don't deal with probably the least. The school files are, I mentioned earlier, the script land and the school land. School land was set aside for to fund the permanent school fund and public education. And so those are kind of slowly being worked through, but we add about 10 to 20,000 items per month to the web through all of our digitization efforts. And that has continued through the last year over the pandemic. And one of the other things that we've been doing is we've transcribed all of our commissioner reports, and we've gotten very close to transcribing all of our Republic donation vouchers, which is another really cool collection. And those will be online soon for people to be able to access and read through a 21st century depiction of a 19th century document.
Nice. So you, I think, had pretty much answered, in essence, one of the questions that came up, which was, where was the registro to the runaway scrape? And you told that story of it migrating to Louisiana.
Yeah.
As a quick follow-up, do you have a sense of when the General Land Office acquired that document and the other archives?
Whenever the GLO acquired the registro?
Right.
That would have been deposited at the GLO at the same time as the connected map and the rest of Austin's papers. And so that would have been late 1836, early 1837.
Very nice. So one of the early real components of that archive. Good stuff. So someone asked about Horatio Crispin and whether he worked, I believe they're asking on the connected map. Crispin, of course, was a surveyor early in Austin's colony. I think in essence, you'd have to say, yes, anyone that was surveying land grants for Austin early on is going to have some role in the connected map. I don't think he's cited as one of the people who's working on the compilation.
I don't think so, and I'm pulling it up right now on my screen. The people who are mentioned specifically on the connected map are Stephen F. Austin, James Perry, John P., Thomas H., and Gail Borden. Kriesman's name is not on there, but I know that his name is in the registro quite a bit.
Yeah, he's doing a lot of the survey maps that are included.
Yeah, he would have done. We've got something called Atlas maps, which were done also of Austin's colony, and they're kind of a regular sized piece of paper on a much smaller scale of different parts of Austin's colony. And those are probably more likely to have been done by Kriesman.
So I know the answer to this, but I want to let you reflect on it to whatever level you think is appropriate. Someone's just asked, can individual registro pages be downloaded from your website?
Yes, you can. Through our land grant database. I think you can actually even download the entire book if you wanted to.
Some 600 pages almost.
Yeah, and that would be, if you go to this one, kind of the way that our information infrastructure has been set up. The land grant database isn't as good with bound volumes, so we put our bound volumes into our map store, and they're available to download there. And so I'm pretty sure that you can actually just download the entire registro that way if you wanted to.
Absolutely. And then, of course, I think it's important for people to realize what we often tell people when they get to see our facsimile of the registro here is that it really is the administrative copy of those first contract grants. Your agency obviously holds copies of the original issued documents as well, and the translation. So if you're doing family research that would be reflected in the registro, there are a number of resources in the GLO collection you're probably going to want to track down. I think that'll be
Yeah, and one thing that I forgot to mention earlier, the registro and the connected map were actually conserved. They were adopted by the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR, in 2012, because there are several American Revolutionary War veterans who came to Texas and settled in Austin's colony, and they're documented within the registro. And so the DAR gave us, I think it was like $25,000. This was a Martha Hartzog helped us coordinate that effort with the DAR, and we were able to digitize and conserve the registro, digitize the 2 versions of the connected map, and also the land grant documents associated with those veterans. And that was a really important project for us because it did fund 2 copies of the registro, one of which you've got and the other copy we've got. We call it the faux registro, Bill.
Yeah, understand. we use that sometimes here too. All right, we're getting close to the end. I really appreciate you giving us your time today, James. I've got a couple more questions, and then we'll share some end of program housekeeping with everybody. I do want to ask, I don't want to date this too much. It'll be available live. It'll be available as a recording going forward. But you mentioned some of the struggles of the pandemic. Is the research room open right now? The people, if they were in Austin, can they come by?
So starting on September 1st, we'll be reopened for visitors, and we're trying to get it to where it's by appointment, so we don't have a bunch of people coming in all at one time. And after September 1st, we'll also start taking reservations for tours of the GLO.
Oh, it's fabulous. And honestly, as much as you guys have done to digitize this collection, it's great to go to Austin and research, but much of this you can do from your house, and it's really made easy for you. So there's a question asking whether there's a similar bound administrative volume similar to the registro for the later contracts. I don't believe there is, although all those documents exist in your collection.
I don't believe so. There would be something that we call English field notes, but not something that is to the same level as the registro. The English field notes are individual field notes that were done in English by the surveyors. That would be the closest, but that's apples and oranges.
Right. So yeah, I want to encourage anyone who's researching Austin colony ancestry, especially in the later 4 contracts. Those land documents are likely available to you through the land office, and any number of support pieces too. But I agree with James, the registro is a very unique kind of bound volume that comes out of the beginnings of the land grant process. And so as things became harder to navigate bureaucratically, as politics got crazier, that just wasn't something that the colony administrators here could sustain. I had an interesting question from someone wondering if they can volunteer to do translation work for you guys on documents. And I don't know if that's something you or Brian.
We are always open to volunteers, and the nice thing about the Spanish collection, if you wanted to translate it, all of the records are available online. And what I would encourage someone to do would be to pick up the catalog of the Spanish collection part 2 and go to the beginning, where the collection is organized by different topics, whether it be the Upper Colony dispute, miscellaneous Spanish decrees, or whatever it is, and just kind of work through systematically. We've done that with over 2 years with interns, and that was whenever we translated all of the documents related to slavery and all of the documents related to kind of Indian interactions and the land. So yes, we'd be open to it. Just kind of let us know what you wanted to do based on that, and we can help guide you through that.
I'll have an email coming up during the final housekeeping. If someone honestly wants to send a request to James about translating, send it to me at my email address, and I'll share that with him, and we'll see how that can move forward. Anything you want to say? We really appreciate your time tonight, James. Anything you want to say as a send-off before we close this out?
If somebody wanted to support us, we're at savetexashistory.org. You can sign up for our newsletter. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out that features a couple of blogs. We have got a very active blog program where we dig into our files and tell Texas history and how it relates to the land office. And kind of how I've mentioned during the 19th century, there's a lot of different connections to the land and to the GLO. And exploring that history has been some of the most fascinating stuff that we've been doing. So go to savetexashistory.org. You can sign up there and keep on doing your research. Come to the GLO after September 1st. We're ready to give tours. We're ready to see people again. And we hope that in 2021, that's this year, in 2022, we'll be able to have an in-person Save Texas History Symposium again. And you can visit us in Austin or San Antonio, probably in Austin. And we'll have a great symposium, and I hope everybody will take that opportunity to join us.
James, you've long been one of my favorite cross-agency colleagues. I appreciate you making time for us tonight. We're always thrilled to work with the land office and support your great work there. That's pretty much it, folks. If you'll bear with us, we're going to walk through a couple of things. One of our shameless plugs involves our museum store. We always mention the opportunity to tap into some retail that might be thematic to our program. So one of our fun offerings in our museum store is this impresario's writing box, which includes replicated pieces that would let a child of any age enjoy sitting down at their own land office desk and playing through the process. You'll also notice there to the left of that image, one of the ornaments, the compass rose ornaments that I mentioned earlier, is part of this collection as well. So if you have an interest in that, drop me an email. You're going to see my email shortly, and we'll get you passed on to our retail shop. We sell all these things individually. If you're not interested in the bundle, you can check with us on that as well. We're really proud that our museum store has motivated a lot of people to give unique gifts to people that they care about and their families to reflect their interest in supporting our site. So think about that next time you're in the area. Lastly, as we start transitioning in, I mentioned that we were going to have a little bit of information about season 3 of our History at Night program. So much like James discussing the GLO's plan to return in September, we're going to go back to live programming with History at Night as long as we can sustain that and as we all emerge from this kind of crazy public health time. So our next program in general to start season 3 will be on Thursday, September the 24th. And we are planning to have a live audience here at San Felipe de Austin as part of that. We're still navigating. We realize one of the things we've learned through the pandemic is how important this kind of virtual content is, both to our stakeholders and supporters across the state and beyond, but also in terms of the program content we can bring to you. We've been privileged to have speakers who have presented things to our visitors over the last year who would not and could not have traveled here to be with us in person. So we want to continue to explore those venues. You'll see that we'll do a mix of live and virtual content programming going forward. We're trying to navigate the best way to share the History at Night program with people in each of those formats as well. We have a couple of good ideas as we plug ahead. So keep an eye on our Facebook page and on our other postings related to our website so that you can see what it's going to be. You'll notice there, we're going to do, I think, a panel on some of the independent sites that we work with, but we'll have plenty of other speakers, authors, thinkers, Texas history lovers, as we call them there. And I hope you have a good time with us as History at Night launches in September. Lastly, we always like to thank our supporters. This includes a lot of our staff, our production team, the Friends of San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site who make this possible for us. I don't often mention, I was getting better at it before the pandemic shut down our live programs. We would encourage anyone who wants to make sure we can keep doing offerings like this to consider a donation to the Friends of San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site. Their mission is to support our efforts here at the site, and they do a wonderful job of that. They're a huge supporter, both financially and with other stakeholders related to our exhibit work, our temporary gallery, and this very program, which we're excited to offer to you. If you haven't gathered, we do roughly a 10-episode cycle each year. It's really predicated more on the school year. So our History at Night season runs September to June, and then we're gonna take July and August off and pretend like we get a breather before we jump back into this in September. So many of you know our staff you see there. We really appreciate all the help we get, both on site and with some of our broader support to our communications division through our administrative support through people like Executive Director Mark Wolf, Joseph Bell, and our Historic Site Operations Director, Bill Irwin. So we thank them all for helping us with this program. So there I am. If you have any questions or comments you want to make to me directly, you're welcome to use my email address. If you want to inquire about translation work as a volunteer with James, I'll pass that along. And if you're interested in retail or making a donation, I can filter that out too. We really enjoyed this past season, as unusual as it's been. And as I said, we've learned a lot. I think we're making better programs for you through the things we're having to adjust to and looking to find good content for you. Thanks to all of you that promote. I'm not 100% sure he's still out there, but Dr. Light T. Cummins has been a great supporter of ours. And James and I noticed early on he was promoting this session because he's worked with both of us. We appreciate that and are thrilled that all of you would take time out of your night to join us this evening. Signing off from San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site. Thanks for coming to see us at History at Night.
Thank you all.